me see the. Nice, thanks for the representation. Had to, if you know, you know, and I had to compete with yesterday's speaker just a little bit, or at least to join into some of the fun. It's a delight to be here with you today. I'm just very honored as well. And you're here because you, like me, really care about our discipline and about the future of our discipline. I'm going to start my talk with some good news and some bad news. I'm going to start with the good news. This is really good news. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics keeps track of the demand for different professions. And they predict that in the next few years, about the next decade or so, demand for industrial engineers will grow by 11%, which is not only much higher than average, it's higher than every other engineering discipline. Okay, so we're number one. And yeah, that's worth cheering for. The U.S. News and World Report, they rank all of our departments, colleges, and universities. They also started ranking professions. And we were ranked number one among engineering professions in 2025, and we repeated this year in 2026. This is great news. And we know why this is the case, right? It's because of what we do. Our tools are so useful and so valuable across many different disciplines and application areas. We save lives, save money, contribute a lot of money to the economy. It's hard to even put a dollar amount, but I saw just optimization contributes more than $1 trillion to the world economy. You take what we do as a whole, it's really substantial. All right, so that's the good news. Now, the not so good news. As we know, industrial and systems engineering is a bit of a well-kept secret. So how many times have you had to explain what industrial and systems engineering is? I see a lot of heads nodding. And as an ISyE, I really like the numbers. And as a university leader, I track some of the numbers, especially at the academic level. And some of the numbers were really alarming to me. So ISyE tracks the number of undergraduate degrees in engineering, and you can see there's a big decline, 22% in just 2 years. Okay, so their most recent data that's available is in 2023. This is absolutely a lagging indicator. And as a former department chair, I could see some of the numbers in my department. And you might be wondering, is this a bit of a COVID impact? And yes, there was a COVID impact on education. Overall enrollment in universities nationwide went down. This is where the news also is not great. If you look at our share of all engineering degrees, that's also gone down. Okay, now the y-axis is a little compressed here, but this adds up to a lot of students every single year. And to me, this has sounded alarm bells. And I wanted to do something about it. And there's just one of me, but there's a lot of you. There's a lot of us. And I do feel that our field is at a crossroads, okay? There's so much demand for our skills, and yet we risk a talent shortage because we're still a well-kept secret. And this is the great paradox of our field. You saw those numbers dropping. That's not because we're a dying field. Our skills are in demand, and we make a difference. Okay? So we risk that talent shortage because we're not attracting the next generation. And the good news, if there's some good news in this, is that this is a sign that we're just not telling our story particularly well. We don't have to reinvent our field. We're doing a great job. We just need to tell our stories. And this is a consequential time for our field. And you can make a difference. Right? And I challenge you to join me in trying to reverse this trend by telling our story. And that's the theme of my talk today. Divided my talk into 3 parts, kind of the past, present, and future. And I want to introduce myself a little bit more. So I appreciate that warm introduction today. I'm a professor by day, but I've had all these other roles throughout my career. Importantly, I'm an engineering blogger. Former president of Informs, which is also, operations research also needs to tell its story better, and I did a lot on external engagement with operations research during my time at Informs. Also former department chair, current associate dean, and founder of ISyE Day. Of course, I have to recognize my amazing team that turned ISyE Day into reality, and I will talk about ISyE Day in my talk today. I'll talk a little bit about my research. Those who know me know that I do a lot of public sector operations research and public safety, critical infrastructure protection, homeland security, and more. Also, as an IE professor, I really enjoy teaching, and the courses I'm currently teaching are stochastic processes, engineering economics, and AI for ISEs. So I've been blogging since 2007, so almost 20 years. It's been the gift that keeps on giving, in my opinion. My main blog is Punk Rock Operations Research, but you can also find me on Badger Bracketology. It's been a great avenue to tell our story and reach a wider audience. I was really honored to be president of Informs, and then last year was a really big year with the launching of ISyE Day. Okay, so a little bit, I'll keep my history lesson short today, although I do like history. And it's been worthwhile kind of revisiting the history of our field, kind of starting with the Industrial Revolution. You know, the disruptive technology of its day, the steam engine, mechanized manual work, and it transformed the workplace, but it also transformed society. And that led to what we know now is industrial and systems engineering. You know, kind of starting with scientific management. So a century before there were data science degrees, there were these early industrial engineers doing data science in mostly manufacturing settings. We also have manufacturing and then human factors, so centering humans in these, you know, mechanized complex systems. And then my area of operations research kind of had a different route. It started in World War II, where, you know, the Allies used math to win the war, and guess what? It worked really well. And because of especially the popularity of scientific management and these, you know, technical tools in the workplace in the US, operations research really took root in the United States. And now we kind of work together. And we've got a lot going on. We're going to inform a lot of our world in the future. We have our work cut out for ourselves. And I'll talk a little bit more about the future later on. So I mentioned a lot of manufacturing, but my area is public sector operations research. And I want to talk a little bit about this area, okay? Because it's kind of interesting, and I think it's informative for us telling our stories today. Over the course of, you know, since when we've had industrial and systems engineering, it's expanded. You know, manufacturing's our past, it's also our present and our future, but we're about so much more than that. And public sector operations research is really interesting. Now, I wasn't alive in the 1960s, but it is really fun to talk to our OR pioneers at that time and learn from what they wanted to do. And one thing I really admire about our community is we tackle hard challenges. You know, in the 1960s, the US was involved in the space race and getting a man on the moon, which is an incredibly difficult technical problem. And there was a lot of effort went into making that happen. But there are other people, especially in the operations research community, that said, you know, we've got a lot of problems here on Earth. The 60s was a turbulent time. There was a lot of civil unrest. Civil rights was a big issue. The problems were messier. They weren't as technical. But there were people that really believed that our technical tools could really make a difference. And guess what? They did. And the most notable area of where this all advanced was this collaboration between New York City and the Rand Institute. So there's a lot of civil unrest. Sometimes administrations change. And they had some real problems. And one of the challenges with government problems is you don't really always have many resources to solve those problems. And the city planners were desperate. They were like, let's use anything. We'll use operations research and engineering principles. And fun fact, New York City used discrete event simulation for the first time as part of this collaboration. What I find also really interesting is that there was a real broad range of tools and ideas that were advanced in this time. It wasn't just one area. It was queuing, it was spatial queuing, data analytics, optimization, and more. And what was really great about this is it really hit the trifecta. It advanced the field. The papers were published in the best academic journals. The research was put into practice. So some of the work that was done in the 70s to route fire engines to calls, one of those algorithms was still in use on September 11th, more than 20 years later. And the research was recognized with, and not just research, the practical impact was recognized with some of the biggest awards of its time. Okay, so this is really exciting. How does this fit into my theme today? Well, over time, we see that our tools are malleable. They can be applied to different application areas. And as we explore those different application areas, we advance the field, okay? But we also make real-world impact. And that, in turn, attracts a broader cross-section of society to join us as industrial engineers, and that creates a virtuous cycle. Okay, so I've seen this over the course of my career, that whenever we kind of forge new areas and explore, we end up becoming stronger. And I'm really interested in strengthening that cycle. Today, we see industrial engineering involved in some of the biggest sectors of the world's economies. Okay, so not just manufacturing, healthcare, transportation, government, service systems, right? So we're there across many important parts of our economy. Okay, so we know this, but the world doesn't know this. So I want to unpack this idea a little bit. I'm going to come back to this virtuous cycle chart. And for me, as an applied researcher, these ideas go together of exploring new challenges and advancing the field. And I've studied a number of different applications in public sector operations research and industrial engineering. I'm going to talk a little bit today, just briefly, about a couple of projects in public safety and election resilience. And I'm going to talk about these topics because they were published in ISyE journals recently. So for a couple decades now, I've been doing public safety research, and a lot of my work focuses ultimately on routing ambulances and pre-positioning ambulances to respond to emergencies. And at the heart of this is faster response times, but there's a lot more to it. My research has studied what the right response time goals should be, how to center patients within the system, how to utilize different types of service providers to provide care to patients in a way that improves patient health, and also how to utilize non-transport vehicles, okay, which are surprisingly useful in systems where you ultimately do need to transport patients to a hospital. And of course, all of these are interrelated decisions, but this is what we excel at. So after publishing many papers in this area, I was ready for the next challenge, and I was thinking about what is the next challenge in this area. And since I had been doing the research, the opioid epidemic really took hold in the United States. So this is a chart of the opioid overdose deaths in the United States, scaled per 100,000 people. You can see a pretty sharp increase there. It started with prescription opioids, and then illicit opioids, and this really sharp increase that you see there is synthetic opioids, such as fentanyl. And we see this sharp rise for a couple reasons. One, the synthetic opioids are really cheap to produce. Okay, so we have this abundance of supply. Second is that they're 50 to 150 times more powerful than natural opioids. Okay, so it's a real game changer, and this has led to a rapid increase in overdose deaths. And they peaked in 2021, where there sadly were more than 100,000 overdose deaths in the United States, more than 75% of which involved an opioid. Okay, so this is a real crisis, and it's truly driven by synthetic opioids. And it's also created this huge burden for public safety agencies. So by some estimates, 12% of police calls involve opioids in some form or another, right? So there's a lot of low-level crime associated with opioid usage. And I was really proud of my work, but I was recognizing that optimizing response times isn't really the right tool. It's not the right approach or right lens to look at to address this type of problem. So I started working with the Madison police, and again, coming from this perspective of public safety. Now, there's a lot of stakeholders are involved in fighting the opioid crisis. Public safety is one of them, so of course ambulances, emergency medical services, but also law enforcement. Okay, so they're called first responders, and that's absolutely an opportunity to intervene potentially in powerful ways and do so early on. There are many other service providers as well, healthcare providers, community services, and of course all of us in the room. I want to give a shout out to my former student, now Professor Veronica White, who's at FAMU FSU, who did a lot of the work. And we really focus on public safety, particularly on the law enforcement aspects. Well, before I talk about this, our research here, I want to mention that there are a lot of policies needed to reverse the opioid epidemic. Like many. This is not an application where you can do like the top 2 or 3 interventions is gonna cut it. We have to really provide a lot of layering. And the interventions fall into 3 broad buckets. Supply reduction, which I like to think of as like, interdiction, which is kind of exciting. Demand reduction, and then also harm reduction, so making the use less harmful. And when I look at this, the different types of policies, I've highlighted some in boldface and green where I think ISyE tools can make a real difference, right? So there's a lot of ways that we as a community can make a difference in some of these kind of messy, tough societal problems. And also that spans those 3 buckets, okay? So again, this speaks to how useful and malleable our tools are. I'm gonna specifically talk about opioid use disorder treatment, which is one of the key tools for really reversing the opioid crisis is treatment. So in one of the papers Veronica and I wrote, we focused on the impact of public safety, and particularly police agencies, and we looked at diverting users to treatment. So it's a little bit carrot and stick, mostly carrot in this case. So one mechanism for diversion is hospital diversion. So if an individual has an overdose and survives, this is a motivating factor for many. It's like the good time to finally, start or stick with treatment. And by strengthening connections here with social services, we can strengthen the number and increase the number that might actually follow through in that treatment. Like, there's an opportunity there. We also worked with Madison Police. Like many agencies had started a pilot program to divert users to treatment because of the kind of low-level crimes associated with opioid use. And so when an arrest is made for an eligible crime, it's an opportunity, a very even stronger carrot to route somebody to treatment. And the program here worked as follows. Somebody that was qualified, they could follow up, join treatment, and if they completed 6 months, their charges would be dropped, and they would never even show up on the record, so it was completely erased. And that was a powerful motivating factor. And then the third we looked at is case management. So the majority of individuals in prison have substance use disorder, and when they are released from prison, this is an opportunity to kind of strengthen their connection to treatment programs that could be valuable. And in particular, for opioid use disorder, this is when use can be most deadly because their tolerance has eroded over time. Okay, so we look at maybe an individual's path through the criminal justice system. We see that we are diverting users to treatment at different parts of the cycle, starting with overdose diversion, which is even before any interaction with the criminal justice system, an arrest diversion, which can be very early on in this chain, and then at the end, a case management. Okay, without getting into the details, we created a discrete event simulation model to study the impact of these policies. What's key to notice here in the bottom right corner, there's an in-treatment box, right? So this is where all the policies ended up working. We start with overdose diversion. Now there's already an arrow to overdose diversion, but if more resources are allocated to strengthening overdose diversion, more individuals can be routed there. Arrest diversion adds a new pathway to treatment, and case management also adds a new pathway to treatment. And of course, we're interested in all of these policies. They're all a good idea. So if you're like me, you'll notice that there's a lot of arrows routing to treatment. So one thing we want to keep an eye on is treatment capacity and making sure, this is something that we can plan for, but we have to plan for it. We have to know what the capacity might be. So we built, using mostly public data and clinical studies, which were also public data, and also some expert opinion. We were able to calibrate our model, and we ran the simulation for 20 years, which included kind of 5 years of a warm-up period and then another 15 years. And just want to summarize some of the results. We looked at a number of the outcomes, in particular total cost, right? So this is incredible, opioid use is incredibly costly to society, and we want our costs to be lowered. And here we've got our baseline model, which is our highest cost, and then we looked at the 3 different types of policies separately at different strengths. So you'll see the costs reduce as the strength of that intervention increased. And then we also studied the impact of joint policies. And even when the joint policies work like at very moderate levels, we saw pretty enormous reductions in total costs. And importantly, we saw improvements in our health and quality of life measures, such as hospital encounters, usage, and death, as well as arrests. I'm going to come back to some of our takeaway and insights. So one, as I mentioned, treatment capacity. So we did the simulation, although we kind of report a lot of the numbers by year. When we looked at treatment, we looked at that at a more detailed level. And treatment capacity did increase. The demand for treatment increased, but not so substantially. It didn't even double. So it was very manageable to plan for the increased treatment capacity that would be needed. We also noted that the policies were generally complementary and not self-canceling. That's kind of obvious when you think of that chart that I showed earlier, that these mechanisms work in different ways. We found that arrest diversion had the biggest impact in total costs because it made a difference for health and quality of life, but also it reduced those downstream criminal justice costs. And the overdose diversion had the largest reduction in all of our health and quality of life measures. And it's also fairly inexpensive to implement compared to the other 2 policies. Now, since we did our work, I'm happy to say that a bill was signed into law in Wisconsin to address, remove some of those barriers for making case management a reality. And that was signed into law about a month ago. So that's been great to see. I want to briefly talk about one other project that has nothing to do with the last one, and this is election resilience. This became a topic that I became very interested in during the pandemic. So for those of us in Wisconsin, we had our spring primary in April 2020, so it was right after all the stay-at-home orders, and it was kind of pandemonium at the polls at the time. And what was really exciting to me as an industrial engineer is a lot of election officials were really interested in maybe doing things completely different. And so not just operations, but also design opportunities. And I got involved, okay? So I was also particularly interested in voting by mail. Who's ever voted by Dropbox? Yeah, a lot of people. I love voting by mail early, in part because my polling location doesn't give me the I voted stickers anymore. So I'm like, I have no incentive to vote in person. I don't like waiting in line. Just do it early. Dropboxes have been around, but they became super popular in 2020, and people really like them. There's some actual polls out there on voting by Dropbox. But as somebody who studied public sector problems, I know that a lot of the public sector solutions are chronically underfunded, and election officials in particular really do a lot. So elections in the US are run at the state and local level, and many say that Wisconsin's is the most decentralized in the United States. Our elections are really run at the local level. And when the requirements change, they're generally unfunded mandates. And so I really my appreciation for election administrators has only grown since I've been doing this research. They're really fantastic individuals. One of the changes is that so many of us vote early now, so that means election officials have to run essentially multiple elections, the in-person election, the voting by mail, and sometimes in-person early voting, and they have to do these at scale. And this is a real challenge, especially if they don't have any more resources. So I became interested in this. I've got another picture of a former student, Dr. Adam Schmidt. And our research here is completely nonpartisan. We just care about like national metrics like voter turnout. We want people to vote. So you might be wondering like, oh, was this just a COVID problem? Or does this disappear? I'll say no, it didn't. Voting by mail and voting early by any means has grown in popularity since the 90s. And in 2016, 40% of voters cast their votes before Election Day. I was one of that 40%. And that jumped to 70% in 2020. In that year, 46% of ballots were cast by mail, so almost half. And 1 in 6 were cast by drop box, which is kind of impressive because not all locations and states allowed drop boxes. Okay, so people really like drop boxes, and they've kind of demanded that we have them. In the 2022 midterms, half of all ballots were cast early, with a third cast by mail. And in 2024, 57% of ballots were cast by mail. So people want to vote by mail, they want to vote by drop box. It's here to stay. And Adam and I were wondering, what does industrial engineering have to say about how to locate ballot drop boxes? So we went about trying to answer this question. And of course, we thought of facility location problems. Okay, we want to locate these drop boxes. There's a fixed cost for doing so. They have to be secure. Sometimes surveillance is required. But we also care about these election officials. And usually, almost always, a bipartisan team has to collect the ballots daily leading up to an election. And I just told you how overworked they are and how under-resourced they are. So we wanted to, we were very considerate of our election officials. And what we have there is something that looks like a traveling salesman problem, but we're not visiting all potential Dropbox locations, only the locations where we choose to locate a Dropbox. So this is a map of the city of Milwaukee, and we chose like police stations, fire stations, government buildings as potential Dropbox locations. And then we looked at historic voter data and demographics, and worked on algorithms to balance the fixed cost of locating the drop boxes along with the collection time, along with access to voters. We wanted the drop boxes to be located where they were needed the most. And we were able to have a number of solutions with different number of drop boxes and also a route. And I will say we use actual road driving distances, but I just show as the crow flies here. All right, so now I want to transition a little bit to talk about where the field is going and really where it needs to go. And thankfully, there's a paper out there that if you haven't read yet, answers a lot of these questions. And I was honored to be part of a team, but I want to thank Waldemar Karwowski and Gabriel Salvendi for their leadership on their paper, Grand Challenges in Industrial and Systems Engineering. It came out last year, it's open access, and to me, I really got to learn a lot from some of the brightest minds in our field. And I have the different areas included in our grand challenges listed here on this slide. And again, you see the breadth of ways in which our tools really make a difference. And importantly, we didn't conclude that we've solved all the problems, we're done here. We have our work cut out for ourselves. And many of you in the audience today are going to be making advances in these areas, and I can't wait to see what you do. One of these areas that's been a passion of mine the last couple years is in AI, especially for education. This is something we're grappling with. I'm glad to see so many talks and tracks here at the conference. And again, coming back to the Industrial Revolution, the lessons we learned then are just as relevant now. Our workforce is going to undergo a major change, and this is absolutely an opportunity for us if we rise to the challenge. I'm seeing a lot of need for making smart decisions, okay? Not just prediction, but decision making. I'm increasingly seeing the need to center humans in smart systems. I like reading government reports. I'm kind of the odd duck who likes to do that. And it's amazing how much there is a need for our tools, especially with centering humans in these complex systems. It's an exciting time. And of course, our workforce is going to change, new roles, workflows, and of course, team dynamics with robots and cobots, and even more. So as a university professor, I'm always thinking about where our field needs to go. And of course, this is going to involve new courses, but also new pedagogy and curricula, and possibly new credentials. There's also a need for us to ensure that our students, which are really today's students are tomorrow's professionals, are literate in AI, but also more than that, they're fluent in how AI can be used to advance engineering and vice versa. And finally, especially when I was department chair, I was just overwhelmed by the demand for lifelong learning. Our college graduates are still going to be our students in the very near future. And we have some opportunities to make a difference. I'm going to share just a few of the things happening at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and our College of Engineering. I did develop a course, AI and Systems, and on my blog, I wrote about this course. It's an undergraduate course that seeks to kind of work around our existing courses, which are rather deep. This is more of a broader course, which focuses on that fluency and helping students understand how to deploy AI in complex systems at scale and do so responsibly. And essentially as part of a team that does that. I was also part of a team this past year creating an AI minor, which we call them certificates at Wisconsin. So this is for our undergraduate students across the College of Engineering. And we have 5 requirements. The students have to take a course in methods and applications, ethics. We have a new introductory course, which is going live this year. So students see these topics from day 1. And there's also a hands-on experiential learning requirement, which can be a capstone course, but it can also be a co-op or undergraduate research. And finally, we have a great office in our College of Engineering that does a lot of professional development and lifelong learning. And I spun off 2 short courses based on my course that I developed, one on AI applications for engineers and another one on strategy and governance. And there's a lot more that we can do as a community. The demand is out there that's huge, and our specific flavor of industrial engineering brings so much to these conversations, and it's really needed to transform our world. Okay, so you also know that we do all this to have impact. As an academic, for me, the impact always starts with good research. And we can have an impact on education, of course, real-world impact in industry. Our tools can influence government policy, but we can also reach the public. So I want to transition about why I believe that we need to engage the public and tell our stories. Right? This is something that I've been doing a while, and I feel obligated as somebody who does research in the public sector to share our insights with the public. And I'm going to tell you, they really like hearing about our insights. They're always amazed at what we do, and they want to learn more. And this, because I've done this in a number of ways. I've written op-eds. I've been a guest on podcast, radio, TV news. I try to always say yes when a reporter asks me to be an expert for an article they're writing. And I've given a lot of public talks. In fact, I have 2 lined up this coming month. So why do I do this? It takes time, but it's really important. It does take time, so we have to repackage our research results for public consumption, but it's really important for us to influence policy. And I do this for 3 reasons. 1, this gives us a seat at the table to shape policy conversations, and our work should be shaping policy conversations. 2, I've seen public support for higher education erode during my lifetime. I find that alarming. What we do at universities transforms lives. We transform our economy and our world for the better. Right? We've got a great story to tell. And 3rd, and this one's in boldface, we can inspire the next generation. And I'm asking you to help with some of that work. So I want to talk about the future. If I come back to the center message of my talk, now is our time. This is a consequential time for us, and we can all tell our story. And I'm going to continue to invite you to the challenge. I want to talk about Industrial and Systems Engineering Day. First of all, I really want to thank IISE and the Board of Trustees for approving this, as well as the Council of Fellows who took a chance on my crazy idea. And of course, can we have a round of applause for the ISyE Day Task Force? As an ISyE, I know we can get a lot done with a great team, and I certainly had a great team. I'll tell you a little bit about ISyE Day. So we've been working on it for a while. It all started at this conference 2 years ago, officially. The concept of this idea, of course, goes back years. I've been thinking about it for years because there's National Donut Day, National Cat Day, International Women's Day. And I'm like, these are all great days. I love celebrating these days. And we just needed an ISyE Day. It's like right up there with National Donut Day. But 2 years ago, I was at the Council of Fellows reception. I tracked down Sundaresh, and I told him about my idea. I'm like, we need an ISyE Day. And I couldn't tell if he thought this was a crazy idea or not, or if he was just humoring me. But a couple months later, he tells me that the Council of Fellows agreed to support this as an initiative, which I'm really grateful for. And then I had to find a team. And some amazing people just emerged out of the woodworks, and we started to craft our vision. We were all sort of all on board with what we felt that our community really needed. So we worked hard on our initiative, as well as our plans for what would happen on ISyE Day. And the conference was kind of late last year. It was in June. So ISyE Day was official less than a year ago. And it was approved. And it was kind of a wild ride to go back and track down our formal letter, because we made a formal proposal to the Board of Trustees. And what this initiative aimed to do was to raise awareness about the field of ISyE and inspire future generations to pursue careers in our field. That is our North Star. Everything is about that. It's about our collective future. Our first meeting as a task force, we discussed what our mission was going to be. This conversation was less than 10 minutes. We were all on board. We're in all agreement. We don't always agree on things. You want a lot of diversity on teams, of course, but we did agree on this. And it's what we always come back to. So that was exciting last year. And then we immediately put all of our ideas into work. So we just had the summer. Everybody went on vacation after the conference, but we were working hard, making those plans and refining them. And then so many of you stepped up to make it such a special and memorable day. So who participated in ISyE Day in some form or another? Right? So I'm seeing most of the hands in this room, so thank you. So much happened in ISyE Day. So first of all, I think a big win was our student chapters and ISyE departments who really stepped up and delivered. There were so many in-person events and happenings on college campuses, and this is so important for us because there's so many undecided students at our universities, and this gives us a day just to reach them and strengthen those connections. So many people celebrated with cake. This is great. We didn't say, have a lot of cake on ISyE Day, but I approve. I really like the cake, so I hope there's more cake this year. The second is the subdivisions and just awesome volunteers started organizing virtual events. We didn't organize any of those virtual events. It was you. You made that happen. I don't have all of their logos here, but we had great participation in those events. Also, the IISE podcast Problem Solved, its new season dropped on ISyE Day, which was kind of a nice touch. And then finally, you told your ISyE stories. And we had hundreds of these online. And I was so touched reading these. And I know that your stories resonate with so many other people. And what happened is we ended up having participation from 23 countries on 5 continents. So and you made that happen. All right, so we got to have Australia and Antarctica this year. You got to help me with this. Okay. I just have a short video of showing some of our ISyE stories. So thank you. You made that day so special, and it means a lot to me. And guess what? We're returning this next year. So if you haven't marked your calendar, mark your calendar. Right? So ISyE Day will be celebrated on September 14th every year, except when it's on a weekend, we'll do the observed following Monday. So if you add this to your calendar, just go ahead and make it a recurring annual event. So as a professor, I'm going to give you a little homework today, but it's not hard. Number one, save the date. Okay, make sure this is on your calendar. You can add this to your calendar. You can also RSVP to the LinkedIn event, which I have a QR code for this year, and you'll see the QR code later. And if you're on LinkedIn, might as well just share it with your networks, add in our hashtags, and maybe say why you're excited about ISyE Day, plan to participate. One thing you can also do is start to plan how you're going to celebrate ISyE Day. And you might be wondering, like, doesn't that sound like a lot of work? No, it's not a lot of work. Somebody told me that they just put it on their department retreat agenda already. So it can be just sending an email, getting it on an agenda, and revisiting that in the near future. Okay, on September 14th, I have a second homework assignment. Sorry, two homework assignments today, also pretty easy. One, share with your network. We'll have some prompts for you. It'll be new. Again, using the hashtag. So stay tuned. We've tried to make that as easy as possible. We want even more participation than last year. Second is connect. So try to get out, connect with others at an in-person or virtual event. And third, really make a point to reach out to the next generation. So you're allowed to celebrate ISyE Day all 365 days of the year. I know I will. But we're hoping that more people make a commitment to take some time at any time in the year to really talk to the next generation. So either talking to maybe high school students that visit your university, or going to talk to a K-12 schools, or just really become that person that has one meaningful conversation with a middle school or high school student. If we all can talk to a couple of people, we can really make a difference. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention and remind you that this is our time, and we can shape our future. ISyE is so important. It matters more than it ever has. And let's tell the world our story. So thank you for your attention.